My name is Chris Jamian. I am CEO and founder of Kate's and your host today. I hope that you're all doing well. Today, we're going to be talking about how you can negotiate your college tuition bill to avoid overpaying for your child's education. To help us understand this topic, I am joined by Joel Peck, a New York CPA who is also one of the country's leading experts in negotiating college tuition. He's been working in the field for more than 15 years. And during that time, he has saved families well over $1 million in tuition. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. We've been chatting, but want to officially welcome you. Excited to have you in the webinar today. How are you doing?
I'm fine. I am really excited about sharing this information.
Perfect. So, housekeeping, I'm going to facilitate the discussion as usual. If you have any questions at any point in time, please ask them in the Q&A panel, not the chat thread. Please use the Q&A panel, which you can access by scrolling over the bottom of your screen. Additionally, for the best experience, you may want to set your screen to gallery view, which you can do by scrolling over the top right corner of your browser window and selecting gallery. You may also want to click view options at the top of your screen and select side-by-side mode so that Joel and I appear side by side on your screen and next to the slides in the same window. All right, so today's discussion. Today, Joel and I are going to cover a few topics. So number one, the financial aid game. Two, tuition reductions. What are they and how to get them? Three, is this strategy right for your family? And then finally, as usual, a Q&A. And again, if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. And if we don't get to your question today, or if you'd like to discuss a private issue, please feel free to get in touch with us directly. You can email us at info@katestutoring.com or Joel directly at joel@joelpeckcpa.com, or you can call us at the numbers on your screen. All right, so the financial aid game. All right, so before we kind of get stuck into tuition negotiations, I want to touch on the wider context around funding your child's college education. So when I first met Joel, he said something that stuck with me, and effectively is that people need their primary view of college costs thrown out the window. I found this to be a pretty disruptive idea and loved it, leaned into it. And, why did Joel say this? Well, in his view, the way that many families look at paying for college does not recognize the reality of the financial aid process. Just like admissions, it is, yes, a game. It's a game. And, it's a game in which some of the rules remain unspoken, particularly for those that impact middle-class families. And here's what I mean by that. So there's many avenues for lower income families to finance college through need-based aid. You probably already know about some of these. So for example, various federal grants and loans, private and charitable scholarships, need-based grants from colleges, and so on. And while these processes for securing these types of support or aid can be lengthy and bureaucratic, they are, at the very least, fairly well documented. In contrast, middle-class families who don't qualify for these types of assistance are frequently unaware of the options that they have. They aren't familiar with the unspoken rules of the game. So they fall into what we call the need trap. They know that they don't qualify for need-based aid. So they assume that they are stuck paying sticker price, for their college education. That is, of course, unless the kid is, an athletic superstar or a budding Nobel laureate who can secure a fancy merit scholarship. But, and this is the point of today's webinar, take a step back, all right? Whenever you've made a significant, life purchase, a house, a car, the flower arrangement at your wedding, your instinct is probably to part with as little of your hard-earned cash as possible, right? So when you bought your house, did you pay the asking price? Probably not, especially if you purchased your house before the pandemic. So you aren't willing to sacrifice on quality, of course, but you try to negotiate the price down to get the most for your money. And the truth is that college, literally is no different, right? So why would you pay more than you have to? So Joel, before I get into the next set of slides, what do you want to add to this? Anything you want to add about the trap of focusing on need as a requirement for lowering the cost of college?
Well, you're exactly right that focusing on need can be a trap for middle-class families. For higher income families, it's a buzzkill. When I start working with a client, I tell them, get need out of your mind. This process has nothing to do with need. It's a marketplace. You want tuition to be less expensive. But I want to make a pause here. Through this webinar, we're going to do two major things. We're going to ask you to do a complete mind shift about need-based financial aid in general. And we're going to make it seem relatively simple, straightforward. But, just stick with the process here, please. If you take one thing away from today's webinar, let it be this. At most colleges, regardless of need, the price of college tuition is negotiable if you know how to do it. Just like somebody selling a home or a car, colleges can provide a certain amount of flexibility on price in order to secure your business. But I do want to make the point that negotiating for lower tuition is not like negotiating for a used car. We'll get into some of the specifics later. So let me stress at the outset, you won't find this advertised on any college website, but know that it is a well-established process going back into the 70s. It's practiced at the vast majority of colleges in the United States. And if you don't negotiate, you're probably overpaying.
Perfect, Joel. Thanks. So let's get into it. So tuition reductions, what are they and how to get them? So first, let's talk a little bit about why colleges negotiate in the first place. So for context, there's generally a separation sort of institutionally in the building between the admissions side and the business side. So on the admissions side, these are the admissions officers who decide who to accept, who to waitlist, who to reject, based on the strength of their candidates' applications. This is the please take me phase. And frankly, most of the content that we normally cover in these webinars that we produce. But the business side of the college, this is the admissions aid or financial aid office. This part of the college takes the list of accepted students and makes the financial determinations around who pays what and who gets financial aid. So once your child's been accepted, their admission is set, right? I mean, barring a significant decline in their grades or like poor or frankly, like illegal behavior. And once you kind of get over that hurdle, you're now dealing with the business side of the college, right? So, and the business side of the college wants to persuade your child to accept their offer of admission and commit to the college. So once your child has more than one acceptance letter, you have all the leverage. You can turn the conversation around from, as Joel likes to say, and I love this, the please take me phase to the how bad do you want me? Joel, anything to add to this right now?
Sure. Look, if you've been on a college campus visit, you've heard things like, we only accept 5% of the students that apply. Admission is more competitive than ever. And a lot that sounds like that. This is to get you to feel that if your child is accepted, you must accept right away, because if you don't, you're all thinking of those answers. We're going to disprove all of that. The reality is that once the acceptance letter is issued, the college has made their decision. You have until May 1st to let the college know your decision. Your efforts will now shift to the business department.
So thanks, Joel. So everyone in the audience may be wondering, why is the business side of a college so motivated to get you to commit once you've been accepted? Well, as most things in this process, it's all about yield. And we've covered this before in our previous webinars. So yield refers to the percentage of students admitted who actually go on to enroll. So in other words, it's the number of students who enroll divided by the number of acceptance letters the college has sent out. Colleges need to maintain yield at their expected levels, or it can wreak havoc on their budgets, on their housing systems, and planning for years. So for example, I often reference this, back in 2009, this story when NYU actually under-enrolled its freshman class by about 100 students, which amounted to about $3 million in lost revenue, which is like massive. And that was like back in like 2008. If it happened like this past year, it would have been closer to like, 4.5 million based on how tuition has increased. So as a result, back in 2008, NYU had to actually over admit the following year to make up for the tuition revenue shortfall. So to encourage admitted students to choose their school, right, over another, and thus to protect their yield, colleges provide tuition reduction offers, or in other words, discounts, okay? Now, one thing I want to sort of point out to people who have maybe seen our webinars in the past, as a side note, what I love about this whole concept is that by negotiating, you're making yield, this concept of yield, work for you. Right. We've talked, in the past about how, with ED1 or ED2 schools, they need to protect their yield, right? And in protecting their yield, that actually works against you. Okay. So like, for example, a school likely won't admit you if you haven't exercised their ED option because they know that, they're not your first choice. Right. And this is why students who are high flyers get waitlisted at lower tier schools. I see it every single year. You have a student who has like they're like a 4.0 and a 34 in the ACT, or like a 1500 in the SAT, amazing resume. And they're wondering why they got, waitlisted at schools like, BU and George Washington, which are great schools. And the reason why is because BU and George Washington both offer ED1 and ED2, right? You didn't take them up on their two opportunities, their two offers to show that they are your first choice school. And so they don't believe that you're going to come, right? Therefore, you're a risk to their yield by not exercising those early decision offers, right? Or options. Now, in the regular pool, however, after you're admitted, you can use this concept of yield against them, right? And that's very much at the center of what we're talking about today. So, by not incentivizing you to enroll, right, it's a risk to their yield, right? So once you're admitted, okay, this risk factor with respect to yield has been transferred from you to them. Okay, so with that said, let's take a closer look at the tuition reduction offers colleges provide. So while these tuition discounts will typically show up on your invoice as a merit scholarship, they have actually nothing to do with your students' grades. Joel, is that right?
Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
Well, they have nothing to do with the grades, but they do reflect your merit negotiating. So get ready to take pride in your tuition bill.
Exactly. And Joel, who can actually get these tuition reductions?
Well, if you're watching this webinar, probably you. And if you're not watching this webinar, probably you too. Because eligibility is not based on your student's academic or extracurricular profile. Eligibility is not based on your family's income or assets. It's not based on whether or not you qualify for need-based aid. It's not based on whether you have already received an aid of discounted tuition from any other college. In short, virtually everyone can save money by negotiating.
And so when you say that everyone can save money by negotiating, how much do families typically save, Joel?
Typically, we find between $5,000 and $10,000 per year per student. That's quick math. You can save $20,000 to $40,000 over the cost of a 4-year college education for each child. Now, granted, that amount varies from college to college, but for each college, it's fairly consistent from year to year.
Okay, so we know why colleges give the tuition discounts, how much families can expect to receive and who's eligible. So let's actually now talk about, how we actually make this happen, right? So Joel always says, first things first, whoever you want to complete the FAFSA, okay? Even if you don't think you're going to be eligible for aid. So aid officers will not meet you, right, as Joel has informed me, if you haven't completed the FAFSA. Additionally, again, everyone should complete the form, even if you have millions or even billions in assets, right? And you can also, this is kind of interesting, fill it out after you hear back from your ED or EA schools. That's your early decision or your early action schools. And, like your test scores, You can choose which schools you send your FAFSA to. This is kind of how the game is played. So, and once you've submitted FAFSA, then the negotiation process can start, right? And this process is usually referred to by colleges as a financial aid appeal. It typically takes place in March, which is why I wanted to do this webinar the last week in February, or April of senior year. And you should make your appeal directly to the financial aid director at each college, and in person, wherever and whenever possible. So, Joel, I've tried to kind of summarize the points that we've discussed in the past, but what else do people need to know about the process?
Well, first, I want you to equate the word process with game. Think of it as a game. So things like when your child goes to an admitted student event, make sure you register. If they go back to visit a friend, nothing official, just visit a friend, register with the admissions department. They go to a basketball game, register with the admissions department. This way, when they're looking at your child's total profile, they note interest. When at the end, if they have two theoretically identical students, getting back to what Chris had said about yield, they want the one who's more interested than the other because they're more likely to enroll. In addition, before you meet with the financial aid office, it's important to prepare your talking points. Be aware that negotiating with financial aid officers is not like haggling on a car. It's not the same as the negotiations you may be familiar with in your professional life.
And Joel, I really appreciate what you just said about this idea of demonstrated interest, because we've been talking about it consistently through our other webinars. And in this day and age, particularly for people who might be watching this video, it's more important than ever. And like Joel was saying, not just in person, but also online engagements. And this idea of negotiations being a little bit different in this context is actually a really good segue into our next topic, which are Joel's tips for negotiation. So this first, we have three pieces here. So Joel, you had said to me in the past, we discussed this, prepare to be told no, right? So then what's your response to that?
Well, look, again, this is a game. They've written the rules and they've done their research. And their research has shown that roughly 30% of the people who were told no, just in general, not about college, 30% of the people who were told no just walk away. If you've ever been on a customer service call, the first answer you're going to probably get is, no, I'm sorry, we can't do anything. And then you elevate it and go up the chain. It's no different here. Very often when you're making that first call to financial aid, you're talking to a grad student who is told to say no, because 30% of the people just walk away.
So that brings us to our next point here, which is, and you've already kind of touched upon this, but prepare to be persistent. Anything you want to add to that, Joel?
Well, remember, you have until May 1st. What's the rush? Hang on. I know the rush. The rush is so that your son or daughter can be done with this whole process and can tell their friends where they're going to college. That's a very expensive emotional choice to make.
And also, too, this idea you were saying, you actually hinted at it earlier in the content, this idea of being prepared to leverage other offers. Anything to add to this?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about some of my kids. Our oldest, so when he was the first one to go to college, and we went on these visits, and in one of the cases, the financial aid officer said, well, what other offers did you receive? And in my brain, which is going about 100 miles an hour, said, what do you mean? What other offers? It is at that moment that I realized they knew something I didn't know. And that is, I was going to get more offers, and they expected me to leverage them. It is a part of the process. I had to learn it as a surprise. I don't want you to have to learn it as a surprise. That's what this is all about.
So to give you all a sense of how to kind of put this advice into practice, Joel was kind enough to kind of share a few of his talking points that he's used with clients that have been successful. So Joel, here, I'll let you take these slides away, and I'll keep going through the bullets here. But please, go ahead.
All right. So imagine that you are sitting in front of the financial aid director, In most cases, your spouse may or may not be there. Your child would not be there. They're going to be someplace else on campus. So they're going to say, well, you know that your income and ability to pay our tuition is significantly above our total cost. What are you looking for? So in the context of being prepared, you'll be prepared to say, we're here to discuss the value of education as compared with the other colleges to which our child has been accepted. Stated prices are across a broad range. We're comparing colleges based on the value of the education. Value is a function of the quality of the education and the cost. To the extent we can bring the cost here down, the relative value goes up. Another one. They say, you've saved most of the cost of college in a 529. Why are you asking for a grant? You have the ability to say, why are we talking about how much we saved? When I make other large purchase decisions, no one else is pricing them based on how much I've saved. Why is college any different? Now, Chris is laughing about this, and we've had these conversations many times. This is where I say it sounds simple, and it only sounds simple if you're prepared for it.
Right. So we have two more here, actually. So Joel, how about when they say you knew the cost when you applied? What's the problem now? How do you coach your clients on responding to that?
It's not a problem. While we knew the published price, we also knew the average non-need-based grants that the college offers. We have choices to make that include the value of the education. Value is a function of quality and cost, and our child has been accepted to several quality colleges.
And one final one here, if they ever say to you, don't you want the best for your child? How would you respond to that?
Of course we do. The best for our child is a quality education, but possibly a lower price. Is there something wrong with that? And then I always leave the conversation open with a line like, please see what you can do. Thank you. They know their process way better than you ever will. Why go in and tell them a specific way to get you money? Ask for the money. Let them figure out how. Through these few examples that Chris had picked, I just want to be clear that this advice is personalized. These sound generic, but they are taken from actual cases where we worked with a family to express their preference. This is not something you're going to do on your own. Again, this is your first time, especially if this is your first time through it. We know the process. Although we haven't written the rules of the game, we've played the game enough to know what the rules are. That's what we want to impart to you.
So let's jump into, is this strategy right for your family? So now that you understand what tuition reduction offers are and how they're typically awarded, a lot of people watching this webinar might be asking or wondering, is this strategy compatible with your family's financial circumstances and your students' college aspirations? To provide some clarity on this, we've collected the questions that Joel most commonly hears from families embarking on the process, or as he likes to put it, the game. So we're gonna dive into those. So first up is, my child wants to apply to highly selected colleges. Can we still negotiate tuition? Joel, what do you usually say there?
This is probably the most nuanced of the considerations your family will make when considering tuition negotiations. The short answer is yes, but it might not happen everywhere. The first thing to know is that a few colleges either don't negotiate or only negotiate occasionally. In my experience, is about 25 or 30 colleges, that's out of 4,000 coast to coast. 25 to 30 that historically have not negotiated tuition. This includes most of the Ivies, although recently there have been some exceptions. Several other Ivy caliber schools, Stanford, Chicago, MIT, but again, some exceptions. And some highly selective liberal arts colleges, Pomona, Williams, Bowdoin, Vassar. Again, they historically have not negotiated tuition, but every once in a while we see it. I mean, that example Chris had mentioned about NYU has been extraordinarily consistently stingy. And then they end up with this 1 year where there are 100 students too few. Now, granted, they admitted more students to fill the freshman class. But for a number of reasons, I'm sure including price, not enough actually took the offer. And suddenly they were underadmitted. We get a lot of questions about state schools. So if you're applying as an in-state student, your tuition is already heavily discounted. So it's less likely the college will further reduce the price. It's also true if you were applying to out-of-state schools, but qualify for in-state regions like New England. But if you would otherwise be paying out-of-state rates, there's a good chance the college will be willing to negotiate. And Chris, if you just give me a minute, I'll tell the story of my youngest.
Yeah.
Who, now we live in New York, and he wanted to go to University of Connecticut. So New York and Connecticut are adjoining states. New York, however, does not participate in the New England region in state. Bad luck on our point. And we live 6 miles the wrong side of the Connecticut-New York border.
It's crazy.
And for that privilege, they were charging my son 3 times the tuition of an in-state Connecticut resident. So I went to the bursar, and I went to the financial aid officer and said, look, he really wants to come here. If we can work out something right now, our next walk is to the purser's office. They took $5,000 off in that moment. That's how easy that $5,000 reduction was. And it stuck for all 4 years. No other conditions. It sounds crazy. But when you know someone who's done it successfully, it's amazing.
And Jill, you had mentioned this earlier too. Just want to make sure everyone, we're talking about some pretty, selective schools in the last couple of, moments here or slides. But, keep in mind that, this leaves, there's a huge number of excellent colleges that are going to negotiate, tuition, a place like a UConn, which is a fantastic school. And there's more than 40 schools in America, right? There's 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, and the vast majority of them are going to negotiate tuition. And I think that another critical dimension to this question of selectivity is the impact of early decision, which we had talked about earlier. So, as regular webinar attendees know, applying early decision, which is a binding agreement, or REA, which means restricted early action, which is, it's an early sort of notification if you're in or not, but you're not bound. And you're restricted to certain, you're only allowed to apply to that one school early action, right? So who does this? Like, Georgetown does this, or, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford. As you know, applying ED or REA gives you a significant competitive advantage at the most selective schools. And just to kind of like cue that up for people, for the class of 2025, for example, at Brown, early decision, they accepted 16% of their applicants, where at regular decision, they accepted 3.5%, right? Yale accepted 10.5% during restricted early action last year. And then during regular, they accepted 3.4%. And then Duke accepted 16.7% early decision last year, but only 4.5% during regular decision. So even for students who are deferred in the early round, applying early decision in particular, still provides the strongest possible signal of demonstrated interest, and thus increases your chances in the regular round, and if need be, off the wait list. However, what we've learned from Joel is that a key element of securing tuition discounts is creating leverage by getting colleges to compete with each other, right? So because it represents a binding commitment to attend a college, if admitted, early decision effectively eliminates this leverage, right? So Joel, in your experience, do families lose their ability to negotiate if their student is admitted ED? Is that true?
Sadly, that is the case.
Yep.
As you put it though, early decision eliminates your leverage, meaning that unless the financial aid director is feeling unusually generous, the college has no real reason to entertain any negotiation. To be clear, however, it doesn't mean your students shouldn't apply early decision to their dream school. As Chris mentioned, applying early decision gives you a real edge in the admissions process. And if your student's heart is set on a particular school and you're willing and able to effectively pay that premium of not negotiating, early decision is a clear benefit. I am never an advocate for going to the least expensive college on your list. That's not what I'm about.
Yeah, that's you're totally right. And I'll also say, there's one more thing. Again, remember, it's about creating a balanced strategy for admission. So even if you're set on Harvard for restricted early action or Boston College early decision, for example, you should still be applying to a number of less competitive, kind of like what we call foundation or target schools. And the likelihood is that at least some of those schools will be open to tuition negotiations, right? And then, sort of moreover, if you're deferred during REA or ED and find yourself in the regular pool, you might be able to leverage a negotiation strategy at your top choice college if you are ultimately admitted. So, in a nutshell, if things don't work out at your first choice, getting a sizable scholarship at one of your other choice schools, right, is a nice consolation prize. And it may even be your first choice school, depending on the experience that you go through. So, all right, so let's go on to the next question here, Joel. So we have enough set aside in savings. Aren't we taking aid for somebody who needs it more? What do you say to that?
This is not a zero-sum game. You're not taking money from anybody. Tuition discounts are, well, first of all, they're not need-based financial aid. They may be drawn from an entirely separate funding pool. Colleges offer tuition discounts because they've determined that it makes commercial sense for them to do so. Again, this is the business side of the school. Why do they do it? Well, they've proven that they'll recoup their investment in students today when those students graduate. They contribute to the Alumni Association, to the endowment. In addition, using savings, even when available, could be one of the most expensive ways to pay for college. There are low-cost loans. I know they don't seem low relative to where interest rates have been, but for anybody who's on the webinar now, you're going to be paying tuition dollars at a different, at a time when interest rates nationally are different. Low cost, also remember, the low cost loans are tax deductible in certain cases. It can provide a lot more flexibility at a reduced cost.
Thanks, Joel. That's awesome. And so we have a few more questions here. So 3, I already know that my family will qualify for need-based aid. Can I get a tuition discount on top of that?
The only way you can't get a tuition discount on top of that is if you're being given a full ride. Remember, tuition discounting, not need-based financial aid, is a commercial encouragement decision by the college. Okay? That's what it is. And need-based aid comes from the government. Negotiated aid comes from the college. Again, it's their money, their choice for ultimately mutual benefit.
Yeah, this goes back to kind of where we started earlier, where you have to get this idea of need out of your mind. This is a completely different bucket. Cool. So question 4, my child, Joel, is a B student and has so-so test scores. Can they really get a quote unquote merit scholarship?
Not only can they do. And I need to look no further than back to that oldest child where we learned that tuition was negotiable. So in high school, he was a solid C student. I mean, a real solid 78 in high school, and he knew it. And still he applied to colleges that he wanted based on what programs he wanted and what type of environment he wanted. And then with a 78 average, he got a $7,500 discount for each of 4 years at the college that was his first choice. I'm telling you, this is not about grades and test scores. Remember, when you think grades and test scores matter to the admissions department.
Right.
They've made their decision. This is about your decision now.
I love that story. Your son was an incredible kind of like test case for all of this. I'd love to at some point talk to him and realize if he realizes and appreciates how much of an inspiration he has been, not only to you, but also to all the families who have learned because of his experience.
He knows. I've okayed the story before I tell him.
Got it. So question 5. If our negotiation is unsuccessful, could my student lose their spot at a college?
Absolutely not. The admissions department makes admissions decisions. The financial aid department reaches decisions on how much they're going to charge you. That's it. 2 distinctly different offices, very often in different buildings, with different roles for the college. I mean, understand if they really want to get the acceptance pulled, they can be convicted of a crime, they could fail classes. There are multiple ways to do that, but asking for financial aid is not one of them.
So then 6, I already received a grant from the college. Should I try to get more?
When we talk to families about their financial aid award letter, which if you have a high school senior, you should be getting within the next week or so, we always call it the initial financial aid award letter. We know it's just their first foray into the process. Again, we know. Now that you're on the webinar, now you know. Most families where we start working with who did not get in contact with us until now assume that that's it. They got their financial aid award letter. It's a take it or leave it, and they better act quickly because there's somebody else who wants that spot. None of that is true.
So Joel, this one also came in the registration and happens to be an FAQ for you. My student is already in college. Can I apply this advice to reduce their tuition next year?
If you're not doing it on a needs-based basis, it's unlikely. Remember, this is about leverage. When you have choices, leverage really matters. So if they're in college and they're considering transferring, that's a great spot because you're creating a new set of choices in the transfers, and in transferring, tuition negotiating is always there. But look, I tell every family we work with, the worst you can be told is no. So try it.
Right. You know, if you never ask, you'll never know.
Right.
And our last question here, Joel, does this strategy work for international students?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's unlikely. Historically, full-paying international students are what have allowed colleges to offer discounts to domestic students.
True.
They're going after, well, really overseas. People don't realize that the testing companies actually hire recruits to go overseas and recruit students. And they're recruiting students with who are in families with means. So the college has no incentive to cut the prices for that. I've not had success with tuition discounts for international families. I don't want to inflate anyone's expectations.
Yeah, it's unfortunately true, but I'll also add, at least in our experience, when colleges do give money to international students, it is needs based. So, for example, we run the Sutton Trust program in the United Kingdom. It's it's a charity program, and effectively, the students in that program, it's about 150 each year. They're all like incredible students. They're like basically diamonds in the rough. They've done just really impressive things academically, extracurricularly, in terms of social impact, with little to no resources. And at the very most selective schools, they will cover the full cost of their education because they're pretty short bets that they're going to kind of help raise the brand. All right. Okay. So Joel, those are the all the points. We're now in our Q&A. So I pulled a couple of questions that I didn't think we had covered or would cover in our slides, but we do have a number of questions in the live Q&A. And so I like to prioritize those first. So I'm just going to go to these. Okay. So, all right. Well, a question came in early from Bib. What if your kid signed an ED contract and got in? Is this stuff still applicable? I think we just sort of addressed that. Joel, anything else that you want to add to what we said about students who get in ED?
Yeah, I've come across a number of families who think that ED is a gift, but they change their mind. This is playing with fire. Early decision is a contract. Your student has said, if you accept me, I'm coming. And I have heard cases where ultimately a student was accepted early decision, chose another university. Actually, what you're supposed to do when you are accepted early decision is formally pull back all of your other applications.
Yeah.
And I've heard cases where students didn't do that, tried to play it cute, negotiated tuition and went somewhere else, or tried to go somewhere else, and they were blackballed. So don't be, again, this is a game with rules. Don't break this rule.
Also, too, Bib, I happen to know the school that your student's been accepted to, and it's actually on the list that doesn't negotiate. So no harm, no foul there. Okay, so we have another question here from an anonymous attendee. What if you have a senior who has been accepted to ED, but you have not completed the FAFSA? This actually kind of builds off it, right? So Joel, I'll just quickly address this and ask you to kind of fill in the cracks. So based on what we've learned today, assuming that your students been accepted to a school that's not on the we will not negotiate list, right? As Joel has said, even though they've been accepted to ED, there's maybe still time to fill out the FAFSA, right? And actually potentially negotiate. Joel, do I have that right? What do you want to add?
Just a nuance. If you're accepted early decision, the only aid they are going to provide is need-based aid. So if you do qualify for need-based aid or you think you're on the cusp, fill out the FAFSA. If you're not sure or you think you're immune to financial hardship, talk to a number of people in 2020 who thought they were immune to financial hardship. Colleges were flooded those years with financial aid requests on a need basis from families who never anticipated having financial need. And when they hadn't filed the FAFSA, the school said, "You haven't told us anything. We're not accepting your numbers on the back of a cocktail napkin. If you didn't participate in the process, you made that decision and they will not meet with you." So make those decisions. Again, the early decision dates are early enough in the year. The FAFSA opens October 1st. It goes live October 1st. That's not the deadline. That's the day it goes live. Most schools don't even request FAFSA information until late January, mid-February. So play the game there. Take the time you need. Use the calendar in your favor.
So Joel, another question here from an anonymous attendee. Is there any way to negotiate for senior year when you have been paying full tuition thus far? So I imagine the question is regarding senior year of college.
Yeah. The best I can tell you, well, the answer is negotiated aid in senior year, not likely. But I did work with a number of families who had a financial hardship in senior year. So much so that it got to be November, they hadn't fully paid their fall tuition, senior year of college. And they shut the student out from enrolling in classes for the last semester of her senior year. And we got on a kick with the bursar and said, look, she's been here 7 semesters. You don't want to give her the diploma? You don't want to let her walk at graduation? That's fine. Let her register for classes for the 8th semester, will you? And they did. And then,
so this is sorry, Joe, this is an interesting question because it opens up another question that we've talked about in the past together that we didn't cover today. I thought it might be smart for you to address it briefly. While you may not be able to get a tuition discount for senior year, how does this all work at the graduate school level? Can you say a few words about that?
Sure. The grad level is a story. So you heard about our oldest and our youngest sons. We have a daughter in the middle, and she's the one who's gone to grad school to become a physician's assistant. So that's $200,000. And she was offered nothing but loans. She stayed in touch with the programs. Many of her friends who are now enrolling are being offered discounts. It was completely shut down at the graduate level because they didn't need to. Now we're hearing schools talk about serving their customers. Those used to be called students.
Yep.
They are aware that this is a business. It's a big business. There's a lot of money at stake. And the entire landscape is changing. So I tell everybody, the worst you can be told is no. Give it a shot. And don't give it a half-hearted shot. If you're going to go in, prepare a story, prepare a reason. God willing, you have one other offer somewhere, and mention the fact that it's a marketplace, and that these numbers do matter. The numbers do matter to the family's finances, and you are, well, better prepared come up with a better phrase than shopping around. But effectively, that's what you're doing. It's unlikely that your child will have applied to one graduate school. Why is it we only look at the campus, the course offerings, and price is not a consideration? $200,000 on top of undergraduate education? I think we have the right to ask that question.
Well put and hard to argue with that. We have a number of questions coming in. So here's one from Chano. You mentioned sending FAFSA to select colleges or waiting until after ED decisions come to submit FAFSA. Can you say more about the advantage of doing this, Joel?
Well, if you want your admissions experience to be truly need blind, don't fill out the FAFSA. That's it. If you don't give it to them, they're blind. But remember, October 1st is the opening date for FAFSA. You've got a long time to file it. You've got a long time to see what kind of decisions, acceptance letters your son or daughter gets. There is no rush. If it ends up that the school that they really wanted was an early decision school that wouldn't negotiate, they didn't get that. Let this be a win a different way. Wait until you're further along in the admissions process, see where they've been accepted, and then file the FAFSA.
So I know we've talked, about how to handle that conversation, right? In our previous discussions, Joel, around this, and Chano, I would encourage you to reach out to Joel to learn more about that. But I want to try to respect everyone's time to get to some other questions here.
Chris, excuse me, can I just riff on that quickly?
Yeah, go for it.
We didn't touch on the fact that I often get the question, well, the application says, are you going to apply for financial aid?
Yep.
My answer is always answer that no. And then families will say, well, how can I negotiate for aid if I said no? Very quick answer. Excuse me. You know that application was filled out by a 17-year-old? You think that 17-year-old has any idea about our financial situation? Do you think we might not be sharing that financial information with our 17-year-old? Yes, we're applying for financial aid. Done.
Yeah, and it's a really good example of having a strategy or a story, right, to kind of go in there with, that's believable, right, and hopefully effective. So we have more questions coming in. So here from Cliff. Hey, Cliff, how you doing? Does it matter if a student you're negotiating with, if it doesn't matter if a school you're negotiating with knows that your other main choice is less expensive to begin with? Thoughts on that, Joel?
Prepare. Look, you know the information that they do. Be prepared to answer the question. Right. And a very easy answer is, I am not selecting the least expensive school for my son or daughter to apply to. If I wanted to do that, I wouldn't have even bothered here. That's not what we're doing this for. We're trying to get the best education for the lowest price. End of story. That's it.
So another question here from Christine. What are your thoughts, Joel, on the recent reports of price collusion among highly selective schools? Is that leverage for a senior who received offers from a few of them? Thoughts on that?
I would not suggest taking a college to task on stuff you really don't know. So be careful. That's not to say you can't mention it in a very broad, offhanded way. You could say things like, look, you have a choice, you college have a choice as to what courses you're going to offer, who they're going to be taught by, when they're going to be offered, and how much they're going to cost. Well, I'm here talking to you because I like the courses you're offering. I like the teachers you've chosen. I like the times. I want to talk about the price. The worst that you can be told is we don't do that. Okay. I mean, I'm noticing in my answers, very often I'm shrugging my shoulders. It's very direct. And it does not have to be antagonistic. When I talk to families about this process, I tell them to think the word conversation, not negotiation. Negotiation has this inherent struggle that we're trying to. This is a conversation. This is a conversation to provide education to a student at a price. That's all that it is. And it's a really important thing.
Yeah, and in that respect too, we look at it, there's a mutual, beneficial outcome. They want the student, you want the school. It's just a matter of finding some common ground to make it work.
Right? I encourage families to use those exact words. Look, we have aligned goals here. When my oldest had trouble with housing, I would send him into the housing department and tell him to enroll them in your process. When you are aligned, when you're both looking for the same thing, magic happens.
So you had mentioned before, kind of like courses and the cost of courses. There's an interesting question here from Serge. Hey, Serge. How does the college determine the price of their course credit? Any insight on that, Joel?
Exactly the way they decide on negotiating tuition. It's arbitrary. I know they have metrics and each college does it slightly differently, but in the end, it's arbitrary. And that's what you're trying to work with. I mean, whatever price it is, they could have picked a higher price, they could have picked a lower price. And believe me, inside colleges, they are talking about delivery of service at a fair price. They know that this environment is competitive. If there's anything that has taken colleges by the shoulders and shaken them, it's the number of online offerings now. That didn't exist before. People have options. That's all.
So another question here from Nicole. So they've completed the FAFSA, but we haven't filled out the CSS profile for a school yet. Will this help or hurt admission? Will it affect our ability to negotiate tuition costs if our child is accepted?
Okay, so first, I hope that person realizes the two pieces of that question are separated. The admissions part has nothing to do with it. We're only talking about the financial aid part. Okay. Restate the question. I want to make sure I'm specific with it.
Yeah, sure. So they've completed the FAFSA.
Oh, this is the CSS. Yeah.
If they haven't filled out CSS profile for a school yet, will this help or hurt admission? Which, we can address.
No effect on admission.
Right. But will it affect our ability to negotiate tuition costs if our child is accepted, i.e. FAFSA completed, CSS not?
The answer is yes, it will affect it. It will leave an unchecked box in your child's completed financial aid profile. They won't be able to check the box because you didn't do the form. Look, if you've already convinced, if you were already of the mindset that the FAFSA is important, the CSS is no different. Yeah, it's a bit more invasive. They ask more questions. It takes me twice as long to fill out a CSS profile as it does a FAFSA. It's annoying. They ask you questions about how many cars you have. I mean, sometimes it's too invasive, but it's part of the game. So play the game.
So two last questions here, Joel. Both from anonymous attendees. Number one, are art colleges, so SCAD, so Savannah College of Art Design, or RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, or MICA, et cetera, predominantly non-negotiable for tuition? So are art colleges, predominantly non-negotiable?
Well, certainly, think of the admissions department instead of grades and test scores. It's about their portfolio.
Yeah.
And then on the business side of the school, every school has a business side. I have found that tuition is negotiable everywhere.
And one last question here. Actually, one also came in. What are some tips for high school seniors to advocate for tuition discounts on their own? You kind of, I think, alluded to this earlier about how possible that was. This individual works with students who may be applying without parental help. So, Joel, how do we negotiate tuition discounts when the parents may not be available to help?
If they're not going to get help from their parents, they really have to show that they've been emancipated. That's a very difficult thing to do. The process presumes, I'm sorry, I just noticed that the sun is coming through my window here.
I've been there. I've totally been there.
The process presumes you have a child with parents and either the parents are going to borrow or the student is going to borrow. So I have had cases where there's a student right now who's a freshman up at Ithaca who essentially did his own negotiating. The financial aid, and I spoke with the father after these conversations. The financial aid director's jaw was on the floor. They said they had never gotten this from a high school senior. They loved him. He got an incredible offer, I think just because they were surprised that he did the process himself. But what the heck? Money is money. At the end of the day, it was money, thousands that came off the tuition bill. But again, not likely. I like to keep lines straight. So the student is going to go for an education. If they don't have to be involved in the finances, don't make them. If they're not emancipated, don't bother.
So just to add one last point to that before we get to the very last question here, I know in the Sutton Trust program, that program is administered and managed by the US-UK Fulbright Commission, and they have program coordinators who manage all this and actually help. And I think in some cases, have those conversations with schools. So if the parents are unable to participate for one reason or another, there might be another adult who's invested, in the student and in the process's outcomes who might be able to kind of step in and help out. So last question, Joel, before we get to our closing remarks here, is it too late to submit the CSS profile?
Absolutely not. Go for it.
Beautiful.
I mean, look, I had a case last year where the parent reached out to financial aid and was told, well, look, we sent your daughter an email 3 weeks ago that she didn't respond to. That deadline is passed. There's nothing we can do. And this parent called me in tears. And I said, yeah, that's nice. Let's go after it. They put out a question to the financial aid director, and the financial aid director came back and said, look, it takes us 10 days to reach this decision, and we don't have 10 days before May 1st, so we can't do it. And I wrote another appeal. They accepted her appeal, ruled on it in about 36 hours, and she got another $10,000 per year.
Amazing.
So, I mean, deadlines are loose.
Well, want to be mindful of the time. So we're going to say thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much, Joel, for your incredible insight. And we have an offer for you. So Joel can help with any number of things. For example, researching the financial aid history of the colleges you're interested in, completing the FAFSA, creating a personal negotiation strategy, and a list of tested talking points to take into appeal meetings, also comparing financial aid offers and deciding on the best fit for your family. So if you're interested in working with Joel, do try to reach out as soon as possible, because he typically books up by March 15th. And as a favor to us and the Kate's team, he's promised to offer a free 30-minute consult to webinar attendees. So to secure yours, please contact him ASAP and use the code KATES30. So it's KATES30. That's the code for to work with Joel. And please note that you do not need to provide any personal financial information. Joel doesn't need it, right? This is all about the schools and their history of giving tuition discounts. And again, if you want to reach Joel, you can contact him at the details on the screen. And so before we wrap up, Joel, any final words of wisdom?
Well, look, we've spent much of this webinar demystifying the process of tuition negotiation. Remember, these are nuanced conversations. We often get comments from executives who negotiate all the time, who have heard this program say, well, thanks, I got this. And they're ready to leave because they negotiate and they think they know how to do it. My follow-up question is, how many people do you know who've successfully negotiated tuition reduction? Because most people don't know any. Fact is, we know hundreds because we trained them. This works. Good luck.
The final thing I'll say is, please take me as an exemplar of someone who's drank the Kool-Aid. When we first came into this conversation with Joel to do a webinar regarding the finances around education, I thought we were going to be doing a financial aid, need-based aid webinar or session. And like you saw in today's sort of presentation, he completely demystified the process, completely changed my mindset around this, and I've been doing this for about 20 years. So, Joel, thanks so much for your time. Thanks everybody else for attending today's webinar. We'll be back again soon with some more content for you in the coming weeks. Until then, good luck with your acceptance letters. Good luck with your aid letters or your financial letters you're getting in a few weeks. And let us know what we can do to help you out. So take care and thanks a lot. See ya.